I should tell everyone that I'm not an accountant. I was a licensed financial planner for about 25 years in Australia, and I know lots and lots of stuff, and I can speak from my personal experience, but nothing I say is official recommendations. It's like getting guide advice from your friends. You've got to check with your doctor as well and make sure it's applicable to you. So I can have a chat to you, I can answer questions, and I can put you in touch with people who are experts in the field. It's interesting. A lot of people want to go and talk to their accountant about their tax and their taxation structures without actually realizing who the accountants are, who the accountants work for, and how that system works. So a lot of people are very surprised when they find out that the ATO is not a government department. It's totally not government. It's a privately owned company. In Australia, we have government departments. So we have the Defence Department, we have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Affairs Department, we have the Immigration Department, we have all these different departments, but we don't have a tax department. We have the Australian Taxation Office, which is a private corporation. It's basically a licensed debt collector who works for the government, but is not part of the government. Same as the Australian Electoral Commission is not part of the government either. It's not a government department. They're an independent contractor who basically tries to convince you to enrol to vote so that you'll spend the next 40, 50 years of your life voting. But if you never signed a contract with the AEC saying that you will vote, then you don't have to vote. This is why at the moment you're seeing ads on Facebook, you're seeing ads on TV, the AEC saying, please come and enrol to vote, because enrolling to vote is not compulsory. But once you have actually enrolled to vote, then you've signed a contract saying you will vote. And if you don't vote, then they can actually penalise you. You're breaking the contract. And similar thing with the ATO. If you've signed a contract with the ATO saying, oh, I'll give you 30% of my wages for the rest of my life, if you don't do that, then you can get penalised. But
can we get out of that contract?
Yes and no. Technically, once you've signed the contract, you're in the contract. So you as an individual, John Smith signed the contract, but then you can actually start another structure. So when I first started out in financial planning, I was just a sole trader. I didn't know any better. And it was just me, myself, registered. Once I started to make decent money, once I started to pay a fair amount of tax, the accountant said to me, hey, you can form a company, and instead of paying 48% tax, you'll pay 30% tax. And I went, yay. So I formed a company. And then the company signed a contract with the ATO saying they'll pay 30% tax. But I was better off. So I was saying thank you to the accountant, even though the accountant's still helping them to take a third of my wage. A couple of years later, I started a couple of other retail businesses and things. And the accountant said to me, oh, you're paying too much tax. You should open a family trust. And there's family trusts and hybrid trusts and discretionary trusts and all sorts of different trusts that you can have. And probably some people on the call have got. Through the trust, I could actually pay 15% tax instead of 30% tax. And I thought this was fantastic as well. But still, the accountant is actually working for the ATO. It's the ATO who licenses him to give advice. If there's a structure out there that enables you to pay 1% tax or 2% tax or even 0% tax, he's not going to tell you about it, because the accountant doesn't want you to stop coming in. That's basically his business. And he's not going to give you advice that runs contrary to what the ATO says he can tell you, otherwise he's going to lose his license. There are structures available, and there's plenty of people using them, but you won't get this advice from an ordinary accountant who's actually licensed by the ATO. You have to find yourself a pure accountant. Income tax came in Australia in 1915. So it was only 100 years ago. Income tax came in the USA in 1913, again, around about 100 years ago for the First World War, to fund the war effort. It was supposed to be repealed in 1918 when the war ended, but by that stage they had so many people looking after the tax, so many accountants looking after it, so many politicians administrating it, they didn't want to give up their jobs, they didn't want to lose the money. So income tax just stayed in. Before we had income tax, there was 150 years of US history, 150 years of Australian history, where we didn't have any income tax, yet there were still roads, there were still schools, there were still hospitals, there was still an army and a navy and this sort of stuff. That money actually came out of general revenue. There was sales taxes on things. Every time you bought a packet of chips or every time you bought a car, there was a sales tax, but you didn't need to report on what your income was. You didn't need to submit tax returns. That's something that's only relatively recent. And again, pure accountants. There was accountants around for hundreds of years before income tax came in. But now you're dealing with tax agents. So it's very, very rare to find a pure accountant. And I've been lucky enough to find a couple over the last 20 years and really lift the lid on this system and say, hey, what's going on? Because once you find out that the ATO is not a government department, you start to ask questions. Once you've stepped outside of the matrix, you can go back into the matrix, but it looks completely different to how you thought things were.
Wow, this just takes it to a whole nother level. So for those of us that signed a contract, clearly all of us, what do you do in the case what do I do? Like, rip up my contract that I signed and hide? What do you do? I don't like this. This is awful.
Well, when you've got your own business, it's a lot simpler.
Okay.
You know, for myself, I was running a few businesses, and I could start companies and I could start trusts and things like that. There's special structures that you can start that aren't actually under the jurisdiction of the Australian Taxation Office, simply because if you don't give them the authority, they don't have it. You've got the authority yourself. They don't have the authority over you. You can have these structures that have perhaps an ACN but don't have a tax file number. And the tax commissioner can knock on your door, the Prime Minister of Australia can knock on your door and say, show us your bank records, and you can just say, sorry, you don't have any jurisdiction over me. You don't have any authority over me.
Love this.
Completely legal.
Is that only if you don't have a tax file number?
On the entity.
Yes.
On the structure. So as an employee, it's difficult because you're contracted to, like, let's say you're working for Hewlett Packard. HP's got you on the books as an employee. They pay your taxes for you. But as a business owner, you've got control over whether you run your business through a company, through a trust, or through some other sort of structure. So it's very, very easy for you in your situation to say, okay, the business and the business can actually run through this entity. As for what I do as an employee, it's not impossible to escape the tax system. It's just a little bit harder, a little bit more complicated, because it relies on the person who's actually writing checks out to you.
Cool. So, wow. So really we need to look at different ways of not avoiding paying taxes, but sort of being creative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's also asset protection. I think I talked last week about someone who had a couple of different businesses and was running them through the same structure. Every now and then in business, depends, if you're in nursing, you might accidentally stab someone with a needle, or if you're in construction, one of your houses might fall down and someone's going to sue you. Yeah. And if they sue you, they can take whatever's in your name. They can take your house, they can take your car, they can take your business. But if the business or the house or the car happens to be in the name of another structure, Cameron Family Trust or something like that, it's not actually yours. Technically, it's not yours. It's owned by your family trust, which is a separate legal entity. And because the family trust is a piece of paper, the piece of paper doesn't make a building fall down. The piece of paper doesn't stab someone with a needle. So the piece of paper is very, very, very unlikely to get sued. And that's a way of protecting your assets and keeping what you've worked so hard for, whether it's your income or whether it's your assets, protecting those to make sure no one else can get them.
So why doesn't everyone know about you?
Why doesn't everybody know that the ATO is not a government department?
Why
because it's not in their best interest to know that. Why doesn't everyone know that income tax is optional? It's not in the government's best interest to have you know that. But you've got companies out there, I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff getting around the press recently, where Google made $2 billion and they paid 2.5% tax. Apple made over $8 billion and they pay 1% tax. Facebook, who's paid 1%, and GE, who paid 1%. Amazon, Disney, Microsoft, Australian Energy, Dell, Dropbox, PayPal, all of these guys are paying less than 2% tax. They're doing it legally. And when people find out about it, they go, oh, that's unfair and Google should be paying more tax and blah, 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 blah. But if they're doing it legally, what are you going to do? If you're on a scooter doing 70 miles flat out in the highway and someone passes you doing 120, don't complain about them. Just say, how can I get a car that does 120? You know, you're not Amish. If you grew up on an Amish farm, you wouldn't know any better. You wouldn't even know there's cars. But once you actually see what's available, it's available to you as well. And if everybody was paying 1% tax, you know what? That's actually a fair system. Whether Google pays 1% or you pay 1%, if the government doesn't like it, they're going to have to change it for everybody. It's unfair that Google and Apple and Microsoft and these guys can get away with it. You can't, simply because you don't know how. No one's told you.
But you know how.
Absolutely.
Excellent. That's
Absolutely.
why we
It took me a long time to find out. When you first start out financial planning, you're investing Mrs. Buddy Duddy's $30,000 and you're messing with some guy's super. It takes you a long time before you actually get to meet millionaires and billionaires. Once you get to meet the millionaires and billionaires, you find out they do business very, very differently because they know the law. They actually spend time reading the Australian Constitution and reading the Bills of Exchange Act and the Currencies Act and the Taxation Act and finding out all of these things are optional. But we're brought up to say, you must vote, it's the law. You must pay tax, it's the law. And people just believe that, but no one ever actually checks the documentation. The Constitution's not a long document. You can read through it in less than an hour. And once you read through it, you find out, you know what? I don't have to do this. So why am I doing it?
Yes, I like this.
Mind blown.
I'm just thinking of my dad and the amount of tax. He's got a truck company.
Yeah.
And the amount of tax he pays is phenomenal.
Yeah. As I say, it's very, very easy when you've got your own business because it's just basically grabbing a bit of paper and creating a new entity. When I'm saying Google and Apple and these kind of guys pay 1 or 2% tax, that's absolutely correct. But not saying they're rat bags, they just do it legally. Then they choose to sponsor different causes. They choose to give money away to charity. Because when you've got a gun to your head saying, give me 30% of your wages, you kind of do it begrudgingly. But once the gun is taken away and you say, oh, now I've got 100% of my money, I might choose to get passionate about, I might want to build a library. I might want to donate a wing to the hospital. I might want to do this. I might want to do that. And before 1915, when we had the museums and the hospitals and the roads and the schools, they were paid for by the community. Rich people in the community would actually become generous because they weren't paying tax. They wanted to give back. And this is what I like to do.
So basically we all need to get an appointment with you so you can sort out our lives.
Basically, yeah, just have a chat because everybody's different. We were talking before about the pharmacists. Everybody's got a different medical condition and there's not just pharmaceutical drugs that can fix that. There's a range of natural alternatives as well. For most business owners, it's a very, very simple process. The reason your accountant isn't telling you about it is because there's no money in for him. If you don't keep coming back and if you don't keep submitting your shoebox full of receipts and paying him to lodge the taxes, then he's going to lose money. Accountants used to do this in the olden days before income tax came in. They just had to work a little bit harder and be a lot nicer because it's optional.
Did anyone who's on this call know about this? Can you raise your hand?
No.
Wow. Oh, you can't.
No, one.
One.
For ones that we do, there's a startup cost, obviously, because you've got to employ the services of the accountant, the solicitor, and that sort of stuff to do it. But once it's set up, it just runs. It just runs, and you don't have to pay another cent for as long as you live.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Shit.
Maybe contacting you then, Jeremy.
Jeremy, a question here.
Yep. If you want to spend, say, $10,000 on structures to save $50,000 on tax, then that's a decision that you make. That's probably worthwhile. But if you want to spend $10,000 on structures and you're only saving $12,000 on tax, it might not be worth your while. It's just a lot of mucking around for not much benefit. It's individual case by case. People on this call who are making, truckloads of money. There's some people on this call who are making a little bit of money, but will be making truckloads later on. And it just comes down to what's suitable for the individual at the time.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
We've got our business, that's for sure. We'll be in touch.
It's definitely possible. It's just whether it's easy for you or whether it's too complicated. And that's a call that you make. I'll ask you a whole bunch of questions about diagnosing your situation and then say, okay, for you, it's going to cost this and it's going to involve this and it's going to involve this. You don't need to fly to the Cayman Islands. I'll just put that out there now. You don't need to go to Hong Kong. You don't need to fly overseas to set up different bank accounts and that sort of stuff. It's very, very simple. It's done from Australia. We use Australian banks, Australian bank accounts. It's very, very simple, but it's just whether it's worthwhile for you. And that's the choice that you make by yourself.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting. So is there many people doing this with businesses?
There is. I find it hard to get stats in Australia because Australia has different privacy legislation. But in the US, it's a lot easier to find out, which is why those companies that I said before, Google and Facebook and PayPal and eBay, they're mostly American companies except for Energy Australia. In America, there's over 491,000 people earning up to $10 million a year. So we're not talking they're actual millionaires in assets. They're making $10 million a year. Almost 500,000 Americans making $10 million a year who pay zero tax. That's the statistics. That's the Bureau of Statistics stuff.
So what
in
happens
Australia,
to
it's
all
hard to find out.
What happens to all the welfare people that are on?
That's a really great question. I'll flip it back. You probably know that the politicians are fat. You probably know that the politicians charter private helicopters to go to their sister's wedding and this sort of stuff. Right now, we've got a truckload of politicians who are bringing in about $500,000 a year, plus their $800,000 expense account, which is they always spend that, they always blow that. Politics is really ineffective. Money they're taking in and saying we're supporting the poor and we're giving to the pensioners. Around about 70% of that isn't getting to the end recipient. In fact, only about 10% of the money is actually going into social causes, and that includes the pensions, the welfare, the building of the hospitals, the roads, that sort of stuff. Only around about 10% of the money that's going to the government actually gets into the hands of the end recipient, which is interesting. If anyone's got the religious bent, back in the day, before there was income tax 100 years ago, they used to say, give away 10% to the poor. And the communities and the towns, if there was a poor homeless person in your town, people would give them money. The community would support them. And if everybody wanted a school, they would all chip in together and they would build a school. And that's how people did things before the government actually took it out of our hands and said, we're going to take the money, we're going to look after it, we're going to do the social justice thing. But 70 to 90% of the money gets wasted on the government who are actually trying to administer this thing. If you want to support the poor, absolutely support the poor. And that's what a lot of Google and Apple and Microsoft vaccinating children, and they want to do good things, but they do it without the government because the government is very, very wasteful.
Wow.
And I'm saying that on record. It's being
Have
recorded.
you got like have you got a clear calendar? Because I have a feeling you'll be getting a few phone calls.
Well, I have an electronic calendar, so people can jump onto choosemycoach.com. They can just go, okay, I want to talk to you 2 o'clock Wednesday or 4 o'clock Friday or whatever. That's entirely up to you.
Cool.
Do you have a phone number there at all, please, Jeremy?
Easiest way to jump onto choosemycoach.com, and you can actually find where I'm available and click on that, and actually give you the Skype details and the mobile numbers, and that'll make sure I actually take your call, because obviously if you try to call me now, I'm on the call, I'm not going to answer. So welcome.
Very good.
For people out there, I'd suggest it's definitely possible. Tax is optional. The big thing to think about is what would you like to do? What are you actually passionate about? I'm passionate about education because I got an education at school that taught me how to be an employee, but it didn't teach me how to be a business owner. It didn't teach me how to run my own company, balance my own checkbook, or work credit cards. It taught me how to work for someone else.
Here.
My wife is originally from Africa. Over there, they're teaching people the same schooling system. They're teaching people to get a job in a country with 95% unemployment, which is crazy. There's no way they're going to get a job in a country with 95% unemployment. So what we're actually doing, because she loves Africa, I love education, we've actually sponsored a couple of orphanages in Africa. And we're teaching these kids how to be entrepreneurs. We're teaching them how to grow vegetables more than what they need so they can sell it, how to make sustainable businesses. Even if they're selling gum or driving a hire car around or something like that, just a sustainable business they can run. And in the last 6 years, we've sponsored 170,000 kids in Africa. So that's what we choose to do, and we can see what's happening with our money, and we see it's not being wasted on corruption, it's not being wasted on fat politicians. And that really juices me up, that really gets me excited, because you can see the impact. Whereas when you pay your 30% tax to the government, you've got no idea where it goes or what it does, or did Bronwyn Bishop take it, or did Pauline Hanson take it, I don't know. You don't get excited about that. This is why Oprah has the Oprah Winfrey School. This is why Bill Gates is doing all his volunteer work in Africa and helping these people out, because he gets excited about it. He loves doing that, you know? And it takes the government out of the equation, because the government is not an efficient business.
This world is very corrupt.
A little bit, yeah.
I'm just as excited as you are, pretty pumped up too.
Yeah, wow. Do you know how much pays in tax? 1%, I'm assuming?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. If it's anything more than that, he should give me a call.
Jeremy, can my department ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
With the option of paying tax or not, if I'm to bill a client with a business, how do I dump the ABN number? Do you still have to have an ABN number to trade?
That's a different question. The short answer is no, you don't need to have an ABN. Some businesses need to have an ACN, an Australian company number. So some businesses will actually be registered with ASIC, but not registered with the ATO. That's something, again, the accountants won't tell you. The accountants won't tell you that. When they'll suggest you start a new structure, and they'll say, oh, you need to get a tax file number, you need to get an ABN. Sometimes that's not actually true. You don't need to do that. So with yours, we'll need to have a look at your business and say, why do you need that number? Clients who's in construction, they need the white card and the blue card and the permit and all this sort of stuff that you need in building and construction industry. So he definitely needs an ACN. Whereas if you're in consulting, or if you're selling jam at the markets or whatever, you don't need an ACN. Some people do, some people don't. That's up to the individual business, what sort of jurisdiction you're under, whether you're in construction industry or automotive industry or financial planning or food manufacture, retail, whatever it is. Some do, some don't, but none of them need a tax file number.
So that's tax file number for personal income tax,
Yeah.
but for the business side of it, with the ABN, do I need that to bill the client?
No, you don't need an ABN to bill the client. Some companies will need an ACN, some don't even need an ACN.
Because I know the bigger companies sort of, or they always want your ABN, or even when you're trading in cash, they'll say, what's your ABN, just to document. Should be an invoice, whatever. But
some of your suppliers, some of your clients will request, if you're just selling to retail users, or if you've got people in your business and things you're consulting, then you don't need an ABN or an ACN or a TFN. You don't need any of that stuff.
Okay.
Wow.
Exiting the system, because they'll tell you do need all of this stuff simply so they can keep control of you.
Yeah, that's right.
I was 14 when I first started work, and someone just told me, "Oh, fill out this form so you can get a tax file number." And I went, "Oh, okay," because that's just what you do when you're a kid. You don't know any better. And when I was 17, Mum told me, go and enroll to vote, because you're 17, you have to go and enroll to vote. And I just did what my mum told me. Some of my mates didn't go, and because they never enrolled to vote, for the next 30, 40 years, they didn't have to vote, and they don't get fined. It's very interesting.
I want to do that because I don't really care about politics.
Yeah, I don't either.
Politicians are only in for 3 years, whereas a good business can be in for 20, 30, 50, 100 years.
Yeah.
Business has more chance of impacting the world than the politician. Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, whether you like them, whether you don't like them, they've done more for the world than the last politician who just sat on his bum for 3 years. These guys got a program of consistent giving over half a century.
None of us are going to sleep tonight because we'll be worried about how corrupt the world is.
No, don't be worried about it. Just say, look, this is if it's possible for Google, if it's possible for Bill Gates, it's possible for me. You don't need to be a billionaire. You just need the knowledge of how to do it. Think up a name for your entity, whether you want to call it Fonzie or Cookie Monster or whatever, and think of a cause that you're really passionate about. Now, once you don't have to pay 30% tax or 40% tax, what would you like to give to? What are you really excited about? Excited about freeing child slaves in Cambodia, or excited about protecting the rainforests, or looking after the orangutans or the panda bears? Whatever gets you really excited, that's going to be the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. On those days when you feel a little bit crook or a little bit tired, a little bit hungover, and you don't want to go to work, you don't want to see that client, you're going to remember the panda bears. You're going to remember the orangutans and go, this is what I'm doing my business for. It's not just for me and my kids. It's actually so I can save the world in my little arena of what I love.
Thank you so much. You've given us the piece of the puzzle we needed to actually.
That's amazing.
Yes, that's what I need, because I have so many ideas of how I want to help, and I thought I'd have to be a billionaire before I would have the funds to do it, and then get completely annihilated by tax. But now that we know how the smart people do it, we'll be right.
Yes, I agree.
Setting up some of these structures can be just a few $1,000s to set up. It pays for itself in no time because you're not paying tax for the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. But depending on what cause you're passionate about. For education in Africa, obviously the teachers over there get paid significantly less than what teachers in Australia get paid. And things cost less in Africa. It costs $15 or $20. We can pay the school fees for a kid for an entire year. You can have a massive impact. We're able to help thousands of kids in Africa, whereas if we're doing it in Australia, we'd only be able to help a couple of hundred, just because the economies of scale over there.
Does it work for farmers as well, like any business?
A farmer has their own business.
Yeah.
Good. For thousands of years, we've had farmers, but we've only had income tax for 100 years. How did it work before then? Obviously, whenever the farmer bought a bag of seed or whenever he bought a tractor, there was some sort of GST or VAT, sales tax. Whenever you bought whatever you bought, there was some money that went back into the community, and there was governments back then, there was politicians, and there was roads and schools and hospitals. Those things were still there, but you didn't have to keep all your receipts. You didn't have to write down your income. You didn't have to go and pay the accountant. Everything just looked after itself. If we had just the GST in Australia, it would actually pay all the running costs of Australia. If we just had the GST, we don't need to have income tax. It's not necessary.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart man. Beautiful. Is there any other questions, guys?
Just a quick question. Well, what resources can we look up to find more about this? How can we research more deeper into this?
That's a really good question, and it's very, very hard to find. You can be on Google for literally 2 days trying to find the information, and you won't find it. I can tell you plainly, Annie Lennox, Sting, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michelle Obama, Bill Gates, who I mentioned before, Steve Jobs, these guys who are paying 1% tax or less, they don't have blogs. They don't get on there and say, this is how I did it. The people who write blogs are the normal working class mums and dads who come home after a hard day and they tell you about how to operate a VCR or something like that. These millionaires and billionaires aren't in the habit of giving away their secrets for free. It took me a long, long time to find these things out. 99% of the accountants in Australia actually work for the ATO. They don't work for you. They invoice you, but they don't work for you. So these guys aren't going to tell you either. You have to find a pure accountant, and I've found maybe 10 in the last 25 years that don't work for the ATO. It's very hard to find the information, but once you've got the information, you could have an audience, just you and Arnold Schwarzenegger, or just you and Bill Gates. They would tell you some stuff in private that they wouldn't tell you in public.
Yeah.
And then you can meet some of their friends and you can connect with Bill Gates' accountant and Arnold Schwarzenegger's tax attorney, and then you'd be in the know.
Is that because people are scared to say, and because like Matrix or someone will come and kill us or something if we say it? Like, what is it? I'm willing to hear.
I'm probably one of the most outspoken people about it simply because I don't give a crap. The Prime Minister and the Tax Commissioner can knock on my door, but they're just people at the end of the day. And if I don't have a TFN on my structure, they've got no authority over me. If Barack Obama knocked on my door and said, hey, Jeremy, let's go and fight the war on terrorism, I'd say no, because he's just a guy and I'm not a US citizen, so I don't have to do what he says.
Yeah.
These guys only have the authority if you give them the authority. If you sign that bit of paper, then they can control your life. Most people aren't outspoken about this. I am, just because I don't give a crap. And I know they can't do anything to me because I haven't signed a contract saying I will do something, so therefore they can't hold me in court for breach of contract. One of the interesting things to Google, if you want to look up Kerry Packer. Kerry Packer appeared before the Senate committee, I think it was 2nd of November 1994 or 4th of November 1992, somewhere around there, back in the early 90s, when they had to go at Kerry Packer, the richest man in Australia, worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, and he paid $30 in tax. And you can actually find the YouTube clip where these guys are having a go at him saying, how dare you not pay your fair share of tax? He had to go at them and said, you guys don't spend the money effectively, so therefore I'm not giving it to you.
Yeah.
Well, good on you, Kerry.
And that was it.
Okay,
Stick it to 'em.
Oh, wow.
It's easy to see people who are doing this sort of stuff. So I've been able to find out a lot of information from the American side. I've done a PowerPoint show. There's 300 faces of American celebrities that you would recognise, but very difficult to find the Australian information. But Kerry Packer was just basically like, screw you guys, I don't like you, and I'm going to tell everyone I don't like you. And he was very outspoken as well.
Because Australia's so laid back and they're just like, yeah, whatever. We'll just do what the government say.
The Australians also like to stick it to authority as well.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to our convict days. Your ancestors were sent out for stealing a loaf of bread and they've been looked after by the guards and the police. But the police obviously weren't the best police in London, otherwise they wouldn't have been sent to Australia. And it doesn't matter whether you stole a loaf of bread or whether you just pissed off the wrong policeman's wife. You've been sent here as well. We're all in the same boat. We're all being punished.
Literally.
And your authority is not really my lord, my lady, sir, and that sort of stuff. We don't have that in Australia. It's everyone's g'day, mate. We're all equal. It's just some people know things and some people don't. Some people have more money than other people, but that doesn't impact on my human rights. I still have human rights, whether I'm rich or poor or somewhere in between. I've got the exact same human rights as the Pope or the Queen or the Prime Minister. It's just those guys know some things that I don't know. Once you find out, you're fine.
Oh, wow. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. Jeremy, what? You meet with you, then you refer us to one of these 10 people.
These guys are in Queensland. I've been running my business for 10 years and basically don't have face-to-face meetings with clients at all. The last 13 months, I was living in Bali and running my business over Skype and Zoom calls and email. Now I'm back in Australia and doing exactly the same thing. It's just much more convenient. I don't need to put pants on. I don't need to shave. And when I'm finished, I just press a button. I say, look, I've got to go. I press a button. Whereas when you're face to face with a client, you say, I've got to go. And then 15 minutes more of small talk and you end up being late for your next appointment.
Yeah, awesome.
Jeremy, what sort of information do we need to have ready for an appointment with you, for example, so that we get the best out of the time?
Just a very basic knowledge of what you have. If you have a company, if you have a trust, if you have a sole trader, if you have whatever setup you got at the moment, most people should know what they've got. If not, poke the person who's sitting next to you and ask them, what have we got, honey? And just an idea of how much tax you've been paying, just to see whether it's worthwhile for you. Because if you're only paying $2,000 a year in tax, it's probably not worthwhile. Unless you particularly really hate politicians or if you really hate keeping receipts. The only reason you keep the shoebox full of receipts is so you can actually get your own money back.
Yes.
Right? That's the only reason you have that shoebox full of receipts. If you never gave the money to begin with, then you don't have to claim it back. You don't have to submit a tax return. You don't need all the receipts.
Oh, this is unreal. I'm so unorganised. This is going to save me.
So if I'm starting a business, I'm better off to start off with sticking it to the government, really, aren't I?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all about sticking it to the government and giving it to the people who are going to use it sensibly. Give a politician $1,000, he'll spend it on lunch. But if you give $100 to a starving child in Africa, they're going to feed the entire family, if not the village.
I'm going to go start an orphanage or something.
Yeah, why not?
I'm coming.
Whatever floats your boat.
Wow.
Save the endangered lemurs of Madagascar or something like that.
Oh,
Bill
and
Gates
wait,
is in
that's
Africa
crazy
making
tax.
a toilet that doesn't, a non-flushing toilet. There's no water in Africa, so they can't have flushing toilets. And Bill Gates has invented this toilet that flushes without water and dries out the feces, and then they use it to burn for fuel and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, he's making a big impact. Rather than just giving politicians money and hoping that some of it ends up in the hands of the poor, he's there actually creating things and doing things and changing the world.
Jeremy, if we're already set up as a sole trader, is
Yeah.
it difficult to swap from a sole trader to a trust?
No, very simple.
Yeah.
Very simple. It's only more complicated for you if you're an employee. Changing from a sole trader to a company to a trust to a private business structure to whatever, that's a very, very simple process.
Yeah.
As simple as changing a bank account. You used to bank with the Commonwealth, and now you bank with ANZ. You just send an email to people, say, don't put any money in there, put it in here, and that's it.
Have you worked out a way to get out of stamp duty?
Yes. The churches were around before the government. So the churches were established thousands of years ago, and the government's were only established a couple of hundred years ago. So the churches aren't registered for tax. Depending on your religious belief, you might be a staunch Catholic and you hate me saying that Catholicism is a business, but it is.
Go for it.
People don't like Bill Gates, people don't like Oprah. But those guys do a lot of good, and they do a lot more good than the average person. So for whatever crimes or bad things they've done in the past, they do a lot of good as well. It's just understanding that everything is a business, and some businesses pay taxes and some don't. Some businesses do good things in the community and some don't. So I don't know what eBay does for the community. I don't know what Twitter does. You know, maybe they support kids with their limbs blown off from landmines, or maybe they just take all the money in a giant piss up at the end of the year. I don't know.
Probably that one.
Don't know. But that's up to them. That's between them and God. You decide.
All right, cool.
God,
So is there any other questions related to like philanthropic
Tax?
stuff and tax? And well, we're all going to up it to the tax office, so that's answered that.
Yeah.
But is there anything else?
A lot of people will go out and buy an investment property and say, hey, I'm going to save tax. And they'll buy an investment property in their own name. If someone's going to sue you, they're going to take the property because the property is in your name.
Right.
However, if the property is in the name of another entity, like a private business structure, then they can't because it's not theirs. This other entity usually pays a lot less tax than what you do, and often zero. Investment properties in your own name is really crazy. It really is. Sooner or later, someone's going to sue you, and the income is fully taxable. Whereas if it's in the name of another entity, then no one who's suing you can get it, and the income can be completely tax exempt.
So if you've already got a property then in your own name, can you transfer it to your entity?
Yes, you can. That's where you will pay stamp duty. Transferring it out of Margie Smith into the
Fonzie.
suitcase entity, Fonzie, thank you, then you will pay stamp duty on that there, and it might cost you 2%. But then while it's in the new entity, you will never pay income tax, you will never pay capital gains tax, and you won't pay stamp duty ever again.
Does that apply just for investments or your own home as well?
Some people do choose to put their own home in the name of another entity, and we're mostly doctors and lawyers who get sued all the time. The surgeon will have the house in his wife's name or in his mother-in-law's name. It's quite common because if someone's going to sue him, they won't get his mother-in-law's assets or his wife's asset. Can put it in the name of the Fonzie asset or Cookie Monster asset, and that's fine as well. So you would actually be living in the home, but technically you don't own it. It's owned by Cookie Monster, and you just happen to live in it. And you might have 6 holiday houses and 5 rental properties that you use, but technically you don't own any of them.
You've just answered my question.
Everybody thinks they've got a simple question, but it always turns out to be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right, this is awesome. Is there anything else, guys?
No, thank you.
I
Very
think we
good.
all just need to do individual little appointments. All right.
They're giggling too much.
Jeremy, I missed it before. Do we make a personal appointment on your website to actually find personally how we save on our tax, or?
Just click in there on choosemycoach.com. There's a few different coaches for like health and well-being and business, and click on my spot, book into the calendar, 30-minute call, and just ask whatever questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, and we can get a bit more personal, a bit more into your situation and find out what's possible for you.
Awesome. No worries. Thank you very much.
You can fill us up with some more knowledge. What else are we missing?
That's basically it. It is very, very simple. It works internationally as well. For the last 13 months, I've been living in Bali. Anywhere that's based on old English law is very, very easy. You have US and Australia and Canada and all these countries that were colonized by the English back like the 1500s to the 1800s. They've all got law that's based on British Admiralty law, and they've just got a few little tweaks and a few little things that's different. Anybody who's operated business internationally will know US law is similar to Australia, but a little bit different. Canadian is similar to Australia, but a little bit different. Ireland is similar to Australia, but a little bit different. So because this is going back more than 100 years to what the laws always were before they got changed, then it works basically everywhere that I've been. I'm not sure it'll work in North Korea or China. There might be one or two countries in the world that weren't colonised by the British, but pretty well everywhere you'd want to go, you can actually run a tax-free business. If you've got friends or who happen to be in Luxembourg or Switzerland or America, then they can take advantage of this.
We were required to enter a tax file number when we joined. Can we just delete that?
If you've joined as your own name, then that tax file number is still associated with you. You'll need to actually just notify the guys and say, hey, look, I used to run through my own bank account and my own name, but now my business is actually this. I switched from being a sole trader to being a company. You just advise whoever it is that now I'm being paid like this.
Is there anything specific other than what you've talked about?
The main thing is hang on to what you've got. That's the advice that I give to all of my clients, wealth creation clients, business coaching clients. You work bloody hard to get yourself that car, to get yourself that house, to get yourself that income. Then if someone's going to take it from you because they sue you, because they didn't follow the directions or they did something stupid, stupid things like that, people will sue you for the most mind-boggling things, and they'll try and take your stuff. Having these structures is a way of protecting your assets as well as your income, not just from the ATO, but from anybody who wants to take your stuff. And you really need to protect what you've worked so hard. Well, it depends in that situation. They'd probably sue you professionally first. So they would sue you professionally because the name on the application form is your business with your ABN. They can also sue you personally. Okay. The idea would be to have nothing in your business name and nothing in your personal name. And that's why these entities are separate from business, separate from personal.
Yeah, so my asset is something totally different to what my business name is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
So we'll create the Cookie Monster thing for you. It'll be fine. Yes.
Unreal. Do you have any other questions or anything?
No, I don't.
All right. Thank you.
You can't go backwards, unfortunately. You can only change it from here going forwards. I would love to have back I'd love to get back all the tax I've paid over the last 30 odd years. But you can't. You just say, okay, now I know this. From this point on, I can do things differently.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Yeah. All right. I think we'll all be in contact. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And we'll all come and
ChooseMyCoach.com is where you book in for an appointment. You can Google me. You can find me everywhere on Facebook and YouTube and all those other things as well.
Do you is the fees up for you to book through your .com?
Well, no fee for the first call. And we just chat, book yourself half an hour. And I basically have a chat to you. You have a chat to me. I decide whether I like you. You decide whether you like me. And then if we decide we can work together, then I'll say, okay, well, you need this, you need this, you need that. And that's when the fees will come up. I'm not going to charge you a fee to talk to me because you might get 15 minutes in the conversation and go, this guy's an idiot. So it's a first date. We just feel each other out. And if we're interested, then we'll move on to the second date.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
all right, beautiful.
Very cool.
Thanks for that, Jeremy.